This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. And today we're talking to the writer and actor Gabriel Byne. The memoir Walking with Ghosts was first published by Picador in 2020. It's a vivid, evocative memoir, as emotional as it is funny, as tender as it is filled with a searing, often brutal honesty about what it is to be alive. It's a memoir too stirred on by the question of home, how we carry the memory of it and its people with us throughout our lives. Well, this morning, Peter and I are absolutely delighted to have the author of this unforgettable memoir, the actor and writer Gabriel Byne, with us at the Books for Breakfast table. And it's a huge privilege to have you here, Gabriel.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you. Well, in the opening section of your book, on the first page, actually, I was immediately struck by it. In the last line, you speak of the melancholy that made me lonely. And I thought, like, wow, that really is the stuff of being an artist, I think. The darkness that you need to go into in order to kind of reach the essence of what you really want to say as a writer or even as an actor. Do you think that's true, Gabriel?
I don't know that darkness and melancholy are the remit of artists. I think we all have that within us. I mean, I was lucky in my own way to find acting as an outlet for that. I didn't really understand when I became an actor first what it actually involved. But as I came to experience it more, I found that it was about putting those feelings that were inside you into a role. And, you know, the great writers, say like Shakespeare, Chekhov or Ibsen, you pour yourself into the character and the character lives. So I was lucky enough to discover that. But I think that by disposition, I tend to be, people tell me, you know, a more serious kind of a person, melancholy. But I don't see myself in that way. I see it balanced also by humor. I talk about loneliness in the book quite a lot because I think that we can be in relationships or we can be, you know, fulfilled in careers and so forth, but we can be at the same time lonely. I think it's part, if it doesn't sound too pretentious to say, it's part of the human condition.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I do agree. And also, when reading the memoir, Peter and I were thinking about, you know, other writers that have written about Dublin, including Peter Sirr himself. But there's other writers like Paula Meehan, who's written about the tenements in Gardner Street, Christine Dwyer Hickey, Paddy Kavanagh, the canal, and of course, the portrait of the artist. I kept thinking of Joyce when I was reading your book as well, Gabriel. So your own memoir, it's intricately woven. I thought it was an absolute hymn to where you grew up, your home, the people you knew in Dublin. Did Irish writers inspire you to write? And were you always a reader?
Yeah, I was always a reader. The first book I read was The Wind in the Willows, which is a book I return to again and again, and I see more in it every time. And I suppose Treasure Island. And then I you know, as I got older, I started to read the Irish writers, you know, Brian Moore and John Broderick and Mary Lavin, even somebody like Patrick Boyle, who was a bank manager who wrote them. Short stories, and then O'Fuilán O'Connor, and even Dublin. Right, I'd never read about Dublin really until I came to Lee Dunn, who wrote those books about growing up in Mount Pleasant buildings in Rathmines. There were very, very few working class Irish novelists. And so I think what I was trying to do with those books was find myself in them, because you do read to a certain extent to find out who you are, especially when you're a teenager. And then I found that some of the books, I could see myself in John McGahern's books. I started to see, yeah, okay, well, any book that begins with F-U-C-K, you said, fuck, you're going to keep going, you know. So I then graduated to do, I suppose, what you would call the kitchen sink writers of you know, the English writers like Stan Barstow and Helen Sillitoe, John Brain, those guys. And then I went into French. I became a huge fan of Zola. I read Thérèse Raquin, and I thought, my God, this could have been written yesterday. And since then, I just read indiscriminately. You know, I'll read anything really. I read as much non-fiction now as fiction. I was looking through your list of people that you talked about, and I saw that you had Kent, somebody talking about Kent Haruf.
Roof, oh yeah, amazing writer,
who's a
isn't he?
writer I love, and not too many people know him. He has two beautiful books. Well, Plain Song is a gorgeous book, and so is Our Souls at Night, a really beautiful book. And I love the simplicity of his writing.
Yeah, I loved that.
Which, of course, I remember going to see George Best playing football and thinking, well, he makes it look so simple that you could go out on the pavement with a tennis ball and imagine that you could do it just as well. But with Kent Haruf, for example, I reread Plain Song and Our Souls at Night before I started work on this memoir, because I wanted to see how great writers reduce complexities to simplicity. And Raymond Carver, for example, short story writer. These guys seem to me to be very close to writing poetry. It feels poetic in terms of the rhythm and the images and so forth. And that was the kind of writing I admired. And I thought, well, if you keep it simple and you write truthfully, and not try to impress with writing and be, that was the only real guideline I had to write in the book.
Yeah, and it was a great idea to go back to Carver and Kent Haruf. They're all writers we love. Actually, we've spoken about Raymond Carver as well, Peter, haven't we, on the podcast? Oh, I loved his last book of poetry, A New Path to the Waterfall, as well. Oh, beautiful. The way...
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was an underrated poet too. He has a very short poem. And what did you get from this life, even so? To call myself beloved, to love and to call myself beloved upon this earth. To feel myself beloved upon this. I mean, I've read it at a funeral that I went to. I said, I can't think of anything better to say about this person. That's what their life represented.
Great to hear you speaking about Patrick Boyle as well, because I used to read his stories as well. I think my father gave them to me, stories about men in boarding houses travelling around to Ireland. Oh my God. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Bank managers. And I think, what was the name of it? At night, all cats are grey.
That's exactly
all is
it.
yellow to the jaundiced
Wow,
eye.
actually, Gabriel, you're making me want to go back and read his stories again. They were brilliant.
Yeah, funnily enough, even before this, I was just thinking in the last couple of days, I said, Patrick Boyle, you never hear anybody talk about him. Yeah. It would be interesting to go back and, now to read about the kind of world that he was writing about.
Exactly.
Because I remember William Trevor saying once that he owed a debt to Patrick Boyle. So I must go back and read it.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's in his mid-80s now, so he was reading but oh my gosh, when I asked that question about reading, you definitely have had a life of great reading. But speaking about poetry, I was thinking of Seamus Heaney as well, and he said that my poems always start in some kind of memory. It's like a beeper going off in my mind. And he said some little thing gets me excited, and then it becomes like an avalanche. A pebble begins to move and it multiplies. For you, like as an actor, memory is vital to you, obviously learning your lines, but it's vital as a writer as well. And did you find when you were writing Walking with Ghosts, your memoir, that one detailed memory seemed to lead on to another, a bit like the avalanche that Heaney spoke about?
I think, well, as an actor, for sure, a memory is, as you say, it's essential. I think about memory a lot. I think about memorizing poetry when I was at school. I used to not like it, but I remember we had a teacher once who was trying to talk to us about, rhythm in poetry. And he said, well, I can't really explain it, but I'll recite these four lines. And it was the poem From Ghent to A. And I forget who wrote it, but it was like, he started by saying, I sprang to the stirrup and Joris and he, we galloped, we gallop all that. And we thought, yeah, you can hear the horse gallop. And he said, that's kind of what how you get hold of a poem is you look for, sounds in it that you can't really explain. Memory to me can be very precise and very unreliable too. But what it does bring you, I think, is an essence of the experience, whether it's factually absolutely that or not. I work hard at preserving memory. And I think that, people sometimes don't understand that memory is like a muscle and you have to keep working at it and you have to challenge it and so forth. But that little moment that you talk about, I think we all have access to those moments, and we think, oh, well, I don't really remember that much. But if you sit down in a particular frame of mind, as you would know, the unconscious starts to get involved. And then you think, oh my God, I'd forgotten that completely. And there's an exercise in acting. It's called sense memory. And before you play the character, this is I think in the Stanislavski or the Strasberg method, where you approach the character and the drama from the point of view of sense. So what you try to do with the character is to invent a world of sense, of smell, taste, sight, sound. And that's not, for me, that worked in terms of the book. I wanted it to be a memory of a sense memory in a way. I don't use it really as an actor, but I found that for this particular thing, it led to that thing you're talking about, Azine.
I mean, because I think that very much feeds into the book, Gabriel. I mean, I think that there's a great kind of technique that's at play. For instance, I think at the start of Walking with Ghosts, and how we're drawn in, because it's like you're taking us on this guided tour of your past, and you're taking us through, where you lived, the places that you loved and remembered. You're saying, over there, a boat rotted by the river bank. Here is the ruin of a small cottage. That's where Mrs. Prunty used to live. Beyond is the chapel. I'm just very interested in the way you kind of map out your life like that in the book.
Well, I think I began it on a hill because, in a way, that gives you a kind of a perspective that you can look out over a landscape. And so a lot of those places are gone, of course, but they live on very vividly in the memory. And as do people that you knew. People are always saying to me, you have an incredible memory for detail in the past. But I think we all have that, really. It just depends on how you focus your attention.
Yeah, and I think if you're a writer, family members get a bit nervous, don't they, Gabriel, if you've got a brilliant memory?
Well,
my mother was always saying, oh my God, Enda, how do you remember that? And they're going, oh no.
Well, I always remember Nuala Foylan talking about the fallout from her first book and how her family reacted to it. And it can be it can be among families who have a different set of memories about a particular event. But any policeman will tell you that if a man falls off a bicycle and 8 people see it, 8 people will see a different fall off the bike.
It's so true. Well, there's a colour to the Dublin you depict and its characters. It's a world full of humour. It reminded me in parts of Pat McCabe's The Butcher Boy or Dermot Ealy's Bend for Home. You've Betty in the drapery shop, for example, her high heels, beehive hair. She's, you say, my first sins of impurity, Mr. O, the chemist, the part-time waltzer, Bill the barber. How can we forget him with his wigs? And then you're on a bus and Brendan Behan appears and he's singing a song in Irish. The whole bus clapped, only in Dublin, Gabriel. But anyway, the drama, the excitement, the vividness, it really must have, I think, it must have made you in many ways the writer and the artist that you are. All that vividness and colour from an early age. Yeah.
Well, I suppose, growing up in a place like that, you don't see it as anything more than just life. It's reality. And the guy who flashed the women and the guy who used to think he was driving a tractor, they were just like, these were things that happened and nobody really commented about them. But of course, what I've learned since in my travels around the world, that everywhere is like that. And that everybody has an extraordinary story to tell. I mean, there's no such thing really as an ordinary story. I mean, I was just talking to the doorman in the hotel this morning, and he was telling me about these ants that had come to, flying ants that had come to Dublin, and that had been, their wings were falling off, and seagulls were catching them in midair, and whatever it did to them, the seagulls, they got drunk. And he said, there's drunk seagulls going and crashing into walls and falling out of trees, and he was telling me this for real. And he said, no, this is actually happening. He said the seagulls and the ants are totally confused with the climate and they don't know what's going on. But the idea of seagulls not being able to stand up, and I just thought, well, I listen to things that people tell me, because people tell you the most extraordinary things. And I suppose in the past I was guilty of taking them for granted. But living in America where you don't have access to that kind of, what is it? I don't know. Is it the idea of somebody telling you a story like that as you happen to be just walking out the door? That's the thing about living away from Dublin, is on the one hand, it does give you a sense of perspective. But on the other hand, when you live in America or maybe other countries, you have to shut down 80% of who you are, because culturally you have to swim with the main culture. I find that when I come back to Dublin, I pay much more attention, and I enjoy the humor and the storytelling and the weird off the wall remarks that people have made, and also the way people use language, which is fascinating to me, because it often seems to me in the way that Irish people speak English that it's more about the sound. The sound makes the sense, not the actual words itself.
God, we better watch out for those seagulls, Peter.
Been robbed by plenty of seagulls there.
So I believe they come down and snatch this stuff out of you.
Yeah, they come down and take the food out of your mouth, practically. But I was thinking also, Gabriel, because one of the other big influences on you when you were growing up was the going to the cinema, the picture house. You describe it as its womb and dark refuge, and you talk about how your grandmother used to bring you there. And I was just wondering, could you say anything about how important that was to you as a writer and an actor, the opening, if you like, of the imagination that happened in this kind of vital space that's now, because you described the actual cinema you went to, it's now, I think it's a carpet. It's become a carpet showroom.
That's right, yeah. I think what the cinema or film is primarily about images. If you talk to somebody about, films that they love, they rarely quote lines from it. They sometimes they do, but what they remember are the images. Like if you talk to somebody, for example, just off my head, about Ben-Hur, they'll remember the chariot race, but they very rarely remember any dialogue around it. So when we recall films, we recall images from them. And the silent films, for example, are absolutely brilliant at capturing a whole world without words at all. That has always fascinated me. There's an English director called Terence Davies. I don't know if you know his work. A Long Day Closes and Distant Voices, Still Lives. And he captured the Liverpool of the 50s absolutely beautifully, but primarily through images and through music of the time, which lent an emotion to the story that was really, truly moving. And he understood the combination of image and music to convey emotion. So I think that when I was writing this book, I say, well, how do you see this essentially and imagistically, if that isn't too pretentious a statement, but how would I describe it to somebody who'd never seen it before? And how can I describe it as simply as I can? And can I give a sense of the smell and the sight, the sounds around it? And cinema was brilliant for that. You just go into this dark room. You could be alone and you could be part of a crowd, and you experience the same emotions, the same story, the same tensions. The best films stayed with you. For me, if I'm on a plane, I turn down the sound on the film, because I want to see, can I understand this film from beginning to end without any dialogue? And if it's a really good film, you can understand it without the dialogue, because dialogue in film tends to be, like in a novel, it's the primary kind of engine for it. But in cinema, it's not about the dialogue, it's about the image.
And the book is very much like that. I mean, the book is like it cuts from scene to scene. It's like a kind of series of kind of brief vignettes in a way. Because like 1 minute you're in Hollywood in the Sunset Marquis Hotel before an earthquake, but then you're back with your mother in the Shelburne, and she's acting all posh before buying you your communion clothes. And then I just obviously like maybe years of watching films or reading scripts must have come into play when you were putting the book together.
Well, the structure of it, I felt it kind of mimics memory, because you can jump in your own memory from a visit to San Francisco to sitting with your aunt. She drinks sherry. Memory works like that. It's a fractured kind of a recall. It's not linear and continuous. So I was trying to capture some of that in the structure of it. And I had some people who said to me, "Oh, would you write a book about Hollywood and about life and so forth?" And I first of all, I had no interest in it, but then I thought to myself, why would I do that Why would I reveal all these secrets about people that I've worked with that they would for sure not want to? And also, there's an element of name dropping that I just don't. I'm not interested in that at all. And I think that any well-known actor who's in that book is in there for a very specific reason. I mean, Laurence Olivier is talking about time, and time is a kind of a theme that runs through the book. And Burton is there he was talking about his struggles with fame and with alcohol and so forth.
You tell a great story about that, about Laurence Olivier and the time. I mean, it's that kind of thing where you meet him, isn't it, in Venice? And you say, and you couldn't think of what to say to him, and you come up with, what time is it?
Yeah.
And then there's a whole thing that goes on from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you just remind us about what happened there?
Well, I was walking down the corridor to my wardrobe of a dressing room, and I saw this. It seemed to me at the time an elderly man come out in a dressing gown. And as he came nearer, I thought to myself, oh my God, that's Olivier. Because it was a film in which Olivier, Richardson, Gielgud and Burton and Vanessa Redgrave was an amazing cast. And he came down the corridor and I thought, oh my God. Like in just a flash, I saw Heathcliff and Henry V and, all the amazing characters that he played. And I was utterly, starstruck. And I thought, I better say something. And so I said, do you have the time? Do you have the time or something? And he said, in a very kind of grumpy way, are they paying you for this engagement? I think he said. And I said, yes. And he said, then I suggest you buy yourself a watch. And I thought afterwards, did he mean this humorously, or was he just grumpy as he looked? But a few weeks later, he left this message in my dressing room in his beautiful copperplate black ink, in which he said, I apologize for being brusque, but I was trying to learn lines. And he said, your question has a resonance for me. Do you have the time? He said, because it's something I'm thinking about all the time. I'm thinking about it, because he must have been in his mid-70s coming up that time. Of course, he was thinking about time and mortality and so forth. And he left the Shakespeare sonnet he said, Shakespeare can say it much better than I can. I just thought it was from what seemed like an inconsequential moment. I've never forgotten it. And now, of course, I'm the one thinking about time.
It isn't a celebrity memoir. I think it's too beautifully written to be called that. And it's great to hear that story. But I think it also, when you do mention people, it tells a story about you becoming an actor as well. Like when you were in London and you describe you're so poor, you've been there for 17 months, you're on the dole, and then suddenly your girlfriend comes charging into the pub, you're off to Venice. And you were so poor that you'd even pawned your suitcase that you'd come from Ireland to England with. Isn't that right? You need to shove all your clothes in a plastic bag. And then suddenly you're in Venice on a balcony. And that kind of, it's the switch and the change.
Yeah.
And it must have been extraordinary that to suddenly hear the voice of Richard Burton then and coming from the balcony beside you.
Yeah, well, it was a Friday morning and I was collecting my dole in Camden Dole office, and I went to the airport. The interesting thing about those suitcases, my girlfriend at the time was Anya O'Connor, used to work at RTE, and she and I went to London together. She gave up working for RTE and we decided let's jump and see what happens. And I remember one day she went to the Camden Market and I was sitting having a coffee, and she came back with these two big silver cases. And I said, why did you buy those? So we had a bit of a row about it. I said, we can't afford two big suitcases. And she said, I'm buying them because you're going to be needing suitcases. It was an act of faith, She said, it's worth spending the money because you will need them. And I can still see those cases sitting in the hallway. And it was true that I did need them. But yeah, we had a pretty meager existence there, which was, all the demons were rattling the wardrobes at nighttime. Should you go home? Should you stay? What would happen if I gave up telling people I was an actor because they'd say things like, well, what have I seen you in? The answer was nothing. Yeah, it was. But then again, experiences like that make you value. To go from the Dole office to the Credi Palace Hotel in Venice made me really value where I was. And I still to this day value, everything that I have. It still gives me great pleasure to know that I can buy something, earphones or an iPad or something, without having to think, does my dole money stretch to this? It's a bit like if you have, I don't know if you've ever experienced, I'm still sitting for my leaving cert 3 or 4 times a year. I have those.
I get those all the time. Yeah. I'm sure we're all afflicted with that, Gabriel, if you live in Ireland.
Of course, it's an anxiety dream. Actors have those dreams all the time, that they're on stage and they've no clothes on and they don't know the lines, and the audience are sitting there waiting for them to speak and they don't know what to say. That's a common anxiety dream among actors.
I get it at least twice a year, and it's always about history. I haven't learned the dates, and it's like,
yes.
I mean, the other irony then is, like, we have a 16-year-old daughter, and the new thing is sustainability and going out to secondhand clothes shops on Camden Street and getting dressed up and coming home. But your mother bought you clothes in secondhand shops on Francis Street, and you said they were alive with fleas, full of holes, always too big or too small. It's really ironic then. I can see why you'd utterly appreciate it. That suddenly in 1997, Gianni Versace is dressing you and you're there. And then the memory of the fleas and the coats, and it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember that night really well. I'd never been to a fashion show before, but we were sitting in the front row, and I remember it was a Sunday night, and Gianni Versace, we were sitting at his table. Liz Tiberius, I think was her name. She was the editor of one of the big British fashion magazines, and 3 other people were sitting around the table. And by the end of that year, all of them would have passed away. But Gianni Versace said to me that Sunday night, I said, what are you going to do next? And he said, I am so tired. I always remember him saying that. I will go in my house in Miami. And he was killed on the Tuesday.
And you said in the book as well that the killer had names of people in the pockets. And it's frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember having to walk to the set with Leonardo DiCaprio, surrounded by about 8 bodyguards. And he was, I think he was like 22 or 23 at the time. And there was a real fear that he was going to be assassinated. And it was funny that years later, he was at a party and a woman broke a bottle and shoved it in his face. And so, you know, this sense that there's something or somebody out there waiting to get you. I think, you know, as a young kid to experience that, to be on a list of 5 people must have been terrifying for him.
Yeah, horrifying, yeah. Well, the memoir is, we loved reading it. It's so beautifully written. And I loved at the end, you kind of build up to this big crescendo at the end. Well, it felt like that to me anyway, that you were building, and you're performing in Eugene O'Neill's It's a Long Day's Journey into Night, isn't it? And yeah, I love the way you said, you spoke about his language, his fractured rhythms, his breathless sentences. They were difficult for you. You felt overwhelmed. There's strong sense of kind of underconfidence. You're terrified of going out on stage and you're getting ready. I thought that was very masterful, the way you built up that tension. But then running alongside it, because writing, as you know, can be about many things at the same time. Yeah. There's the story of your mum and dad, and you're saying to your mother, forgive my inability to show love. It's coming as an apology nearly to your parents. It's overpowering. I thought it felt nearly like a love song to your parents and what they gave to you. I mean, did you see it like that at that stage in the book you wanted to tell them, even though they were dead, how much you loved them?
Well, I think one of the things that I suppose writing, you can go as a writer, as you both very well know, to a place that can be denied to other people. You can construct situations that, you know, are so almost impossible to replicate. But, you know, when I was doing the show in the Gaiety, I don't know how many people would get the opportunity to have a conversation with a parent who's passed on, to ask them the questions then that they should have asked. And, you know, what I was struck by was O'Neill talks about, well, all his plays really are about people taking off masks. And I think I don't know if I quoted in the book, but he had this great quotation where he says, we are not just haunted by the masks we wear ourselves, but by the masks that others wear. And it's removing the mask, because acting at its best, I think, is when people are fearless and they just say, this is who I am and this is the way it is. And condemn me if you like, but I'm telling the truth. And I thought about that particular thing, because he struggled with that all his life, and he put all his fears and his doubts and everything else into his characters and into his plays. And he wrote autobiographically to a great extent. He wrote about the doomed family of his, the father, the mother, the poor brother, Jamie. And I thought about that. Well, what would it be like if you could be in a situation where your parents had their masks off and you had your mask off? What would you say to them? And the question that, I'd always wanted to ask my mother. In fact, I think it's a question that so many women of that generation were never asked, which is, was children and marriage enough? Did you feel that your wings were clipped and you just never became who you felt you ought to have become? Because your role as a mother and as a wife was prescribed. You had children, you did the housework, and you had one day out a year, which might have been the Shelbourne Hotel, where you get to say to be a woman is to be basically to be a slave, and you don't get thanked for it. But there was also there was a scene in Last Tango in Paris. I don't know if you remember that film, Bertolucci's film. And Bertolucci talks about setting up this scene where he puts Marlon Brando beside the coffin of his mother. And of course, being Brando, he went to this, I think he calls her a pig in the thing, but it's absolutely a shocking soliloquy in which Brando is really talking about his own mother. So being able to talk to your parents in a situation, say in front of 1,200 people, where people say, yeah, my mother is this, or my father was that. Because what I always thought was that writing and reading is a two-handed thing. I think it was John McGarn who said the book doesn't live until it's in the hands of a reader. But your partner is the audience and your partner is the reader. And the best compliment you can give a writer, I suppose, is to say that, what you had to say affected me and moved me and made me think. Because so many, things I go to, I think, well, I didn't laugh. And I wasn't really moved. And yes, I admired, the content, but it's the function of literature, I think, in theatre to make you think and to see the world in a way when you close the book that you hadn't seen before. I mean, not to get into it, but in Intimate City, it has made me think about, like you talk in the book about passing certain places every day and not realizing, what the real story of that little cottage or railings or whatever is, and you trace it back. Well, I feel that the same with a play or a film. You have to reach somebody on an emotional level. Somebody asked me recently, do I like Beckett? And I admire Beckett, but I've never left a Beckett play saying, wow, that really got to me. I could just as easily read what Beckett had to say in an essay. And I feel the same about Pinter and Tom Stoppard, but I never feel that about Chekhov. I always leave Chekhov, having had a bit of a laugh, moved if it's a really good production, and provoked.
Yeah, I'm on your side there. I'm with Chekhov as well, Gabriel. But I left that theatre, when you performed in the Katie, really moved by it, In fact, that's why you're here on the podcast, because, I just thought it was so good. But the thing about standing there and speaking to your parents, even though they're dead, I did feel that. I felt it for you as well. It must have been a very emotional thing to do as well. But you quote Shelley at the start of the memoir, "Fear not for the future, weep not for the past," which is a quote your mum often quoted, isn't that right? And I was just wondering, do you believe in that? Do you believe in that now?
I do believe it, absolutely. But although it's one short sentence, it's an extremely difficult thing to adhere to not worry about the future and to forget the past. But of course, it's really, truly the only way to live. I found that for a long time, I was living in the past, like afraid of the future, but regretful of the past. So the present was just passing by. So the challenge as I get on in years is to say, as much as I possibly can, to live in the present. And it's very, very difficult. But it's something worth trying to do, because the reality is that the past is dead and the future is dead too. And the only thing that exists to a certain extent is the present. And even as you say it, it's dying. So I don't know what to make of any of it,
Yeah,
really.
I know. Except that we're here right now. We're enjoying ourselves
We're
listening
here
to
right now.
Gabriel,
Yeah.
are you working on a new book, or what? Have you put this aside now, and are you thinking I'm going to write another book? Are you thinking of writing a novel or stories, or what are you thinking? Or are you just thinking I want to rest right now?
I so admire writers and poets, and that I think, of course, they're two different forms. But I obviously, but I would love to write a time with the idea of a book that is simple and imagistic and yet tells a story. I was interested in, I think you had Claire Keegan on a few weeks ago.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she's brilliant.
And Claire is the kind of writer I really admire, because she doesn't make any huge thing about it. She just says, look, I write down something and then I try to get a sentence to go with that. So this idea that I have for the book, if I could reach that kind of simplicity. You mentioned Dermot Healy. I mean, Dermot Healy was, like, writers who write like that, Dermot Healy or Roddy Doyle or people, they're the kind of people I look to and say, could I write something as simple as that? Get rid of all the fluff and just write something that approaches the notion of a poem.
Yeah. Get rid of all the clutter. I actually, when I was reading the opening bit, and it drew me in immediately. And because we just come from small things like these, reading that and talking to Claire Keegan, I felt there was a real comparison to be made there between you and her kind of writing. So good luck with that, Gabriel. It sounds like you've got a strong idea of what you want to achieve. I suppose people like Kent Ruff and those, they're great guides as well, aren't they? When you want to write, to look to them, look to the greats.
Yeah, it's like if you're doing a film and you'll go back and you'll look at other films, you might get one tiny thing out of it. I remember when I was doing Miller's Crossing, I looked at, which was a gangster film, the Coen brothers, and I looked at Scarface, the original Scarface with Paul Muni. And there's a scene in it where he's talking to a cop and he's going to light a cigarette, and he lights the match off the cop's badge, which is a real moment of, this is what I think of authority. And so when we were doing the film, I said to Joel and Ethan Coen, I said, I'd love to be able to do that, but you would not believe the amount of wires and things that had to be put together to make that moment work. But we did it. And so you would take away some small thing, but more than that, it gives you a feeling of, that's where this exists. And so going back to Kent or Ruff or whoever, Steinbeck, Steinbeck gives you great hope when he says about writing. He says, if you can only do one sentence today, that's enough. Just do one sentence. Going back to those guys is a bit like going back to films. It's not that you're going to copy them or anything. It's you're going to say, well, that gives me the feeling of what I want it to be. Yeah. And hopefully I can do it.
Well, I think definitely you are doing it, Gabriel. I think actually, Peter, we might actually come to a close there now, will we?
Yeah.
And just, Gabriel, I know it's your day off, Gabriel, so we don't want to be, to be spending any more of your time. But just to say thank you so much for coming in to Books for Breakfast. It's been a real pleasure to listen to you, and I think we could go on for much longer. I know you probably want to go.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to talk to both of you. And now I'm an avid listener of the podcast, and I will alert as many people as I can to tune into it, because there's so many book programs out there that sometimes it's just overwhelming. But I find if you follow, a particular podcast, you get as much as you need to get in one podcast, rather than trying to listen to The Guardian or The Times or The New York Times. It's just all gets too much. But I'm an avid follower now, so I'll be keeping an eye on you to make sure that you're.
Oh, thank you very much. So we're still keeping it going. So that was Gabriel Byrne, and he was talking to us about his brilliant memoir, Walking with Ghosts. It dazzles with unflinching honesty, and Gabriel Byrne definitely dazzled this morning as well. So thank you very much for coming on. And as usual, all details of this book will be available on our podcast, www.booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. So thank you again, Gabriel.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.